New Orleans in the early 1800s was a city unlike any other in America. Known for its vibrant culture, music, and French Creole traditions, it was also a city built on the back of slavery. Behind the sounds of brass instruments and the aroma of gumbo simmering in crowded kitchens, there existed a brutal system of human bondage. Wealthy families dined in opulence while enslaved men and women labored endlessly to maintain their comfort. Among the enslaved, kitchen workers bore a unique and paradoxical role. They were entrusted with preparing the food that sustained their masters, yet they remained the most invisible, their names rarely recorded, their stories often erased. Within these kitchens, enslaved cooks carried knowledge passed down from Africa, recipes, herbal remedies, and even an understanding of plants that could heal or kill. The kitchen was their cage, but it was also the one place where they wielded silent power. It was here, in the kitchens of New Orleans, that one enslaved woman named Violet would rise from obscurity. She was not a warrior or a revolutionary in the traditional sense. She carried no gun, led no rebellion, and commanded no army. Yet her name survives because she chose a weapon that slipped past chains and shackles: poison. Violet's story is not one of open revolt but of quiet vengeance, a rebellion that took place at the dinner table, transforming food into both sustenance and destruction. Violet's life, like so many others in bondage, was defined by silence. She worked in the kitchen from dawn to dusk, feeding those who claimed ownership over her body and her future. The work was grueling, hot, and unforgiving, yet she performed it with an obedience expected of the enslaved. But beneath this surface of quiet labor lay the suppressed rage of generations. Violet saw everything: the laughter at the dining table, the cruelty of her mistress, the indifference of her master. She heard conversations she was never meant to hear, secrets whispered between family members, and arguments over money, property, and politics. Like all enslaved cooks, she lived in the strange paradox of invisibility. Always present, always watching, yet never acknowledged as human. The kitchen was her stage, and though her masters thought she was nothing more than a servant, she was a silent archivist of their arrogance. This closeness gave her something most enslaved people never had: access. Access to their food, their plates, and their trust. In that trust lay danger, for while they ate without a second thought, Violet's mind was already charting a different path. Her revenge would not be loud or dramatic. It would not come with fire and chains, but with a spoonful of stew, a sip of wine, or a slice of bread. The very act of feeding would become her instrument of rebellion. To understand Violet's vengeance, one must understand the cultural and botanical world she inherited. Enslaved Africans in New Orleans carried with them centuries of knowledge about herbs, plants, and remedies. What could soothe a fever? What could ease childbirth? What could calm the spirit? These secrets survived in whispered traditions. But just as plants could heal, they could also kill. Slaveholders across the South feared the poisoned kitchen, the belief that their trusted cooks might one day lace their meals with death. This paranoia was not unfounded. Throughout the Caribbean and the American South, cases of slave poisonings were whispered about, though often shrouded in rumor and legend. Violet existed in this shadowy tradition, where the boundary between healer and killer was razor-thin. The very same hands that stirred soups to comfort her masters could just as easily introduce a bitter root, a crushed seed, or a powder that would bring agony. The kitchen was a battleground invisible to outsiders. While overseers watched fields and masters counted profits, no one considered that rebellion could be served on a silver platter. Violet knew this, and when her moment came, she would draw from that forbidden knowledge. Her act of vengeance would not be rash but deliberate, calculated, and rooted in the deep cultural memory of survival against impossible odds. The tragedy of slavery is often told through chains, auctions, and whips, but Violet's story reveals another weapon of the enslaved: patience. Her vengeance was not immediate. It brewed over years of humiliation, punishment, and grief. Perhaps she watched her loved ones sold away. Perhaps she endured the cruelty of a mistress, or perhaps her body bore the scars of punishment. Whatever the catalyst, Violet's heart hardened over time, her will sharpened by suffering. In a society that denied her humanity, her only pathway to reclaiming power was through subversion. Her rebellion would not rally others in song or speech. It would not make headlines or incite uprisings. It would be a private war fought in secret, carried out in the intimacy of the dinner table. As she prepared meals with steady hands, no one could have imagined the storm hidden in her cooking. Her masters tasted comfort, but within that comfort lay the seeds of destruction. Poison became her language, her way of speaking truth to power in a world that silenced her voice. Violet's vengeance was not just about ending lives. It was about reclaiming dignity, about reminding her oppressors that even in chains, the enslaved were never powerless. Her story begins in the kitchen, but its echoes ripple through the dark history of New Orleans, a chilling reminder that vengeance sometimes comes not with fire and blood, but with a quiet meal served at dusk. New Orleans in the 19th century was a place of contrasts. Wealth and poverty existed side by side, and so did freedom and bondage. The French Quarter bustled with merchants, Creole aristocrats, and foreign travelers, yet just blocks away enslaved men and women lived under brutal conditions. The city's prosperity depended on them, yet they remained invisible in official records except as property. Enslaved people were everywhere. In the markets, in the fields along the Mississippi, and most importantly, in the kitchens of the wealthy. The kitchen was the beating heart of Creole households, and it was often entrusted to enslaved women who carried traditions from Africa and the Caribbean. These kitchens produced dishes that became iconic: gumbo, jambalaya, etouffee, meals flavored with spices and secrets. But within those pots and pans, there was more than just food. There was power. And in New Orleans, where rumors of voodoo, witchcraft, and poison swirled in the humid air, the kitchen became more than a place of nourishment. It became a place of fear. Slaveholders trusted their cooks to feed them, but deep down, they knew that trust could be betrayed with a single ingredient. In this world of contradiction, where one person's comfort was built on another's misery, Violet prepared to write her chapter of vengeance. The life of a kitchen slave was unlike any other role in bondage. While field hands worked under the lash of overseers, cooks bore a different type of weight: responsibility. A spoiled meal could bring punishment, but a well-prepared feast brought no reward, only more labor. Violet's daily existence revolved around fire, smoke, and endless commands. Her body bore the burns of boiling water and the cuts of knives, yet her spirit bore a deeper wound: servitude. To her masters, Violet was just another tool, as replaceable as the iron pots she cooked with. Yet they depended on her more than they admitted. She fed them, nourished them, and sustained their lives day after day. Every mouthful they swallowed was an act of blind trust. And this trust was dangerous, for in that dependence lay a vulnerability. They could chain her hands, they could beat her body, but they could not separate themselves from the food she prepared. Each bite they took was a gamble, even if they did not realize it. For Violet, the kitchen was both her prison and her stage. Each meal she served brought her closer to the possibility of revenge. And when the burden of servitude became too heavy, she discovered the only way to shift the weight was to let it crush her oppressors instead. What drove Violet to turn to poison remains a mystery, but her motives were likely carved from the cruelty of her daily existence. Perhaps it was the separation from a child sold downriver, a punishment inflicted for the smallest mistake, or the years of humiliation at the hands of her mistress. Whatever the spark, it grew into a fire that burned quietly within her heart. Violet was not reckless. She was deliberate, patient, and cunning. She knew her master's habits, their favorite meals, their weaknesses. She knew which guests they entertained, which foods they consumed without hesitation, which dishes were savored late into the night. And into this knowledge, she planted her plan, like a seed of nightshade hidden among herbs. Her vengeance was not immediate. It was cultivated. Every time she stirred a pot or sliced an onion, she rehearsed her rebellion in silence. The kitchen, once her place of bondage, had become her battlefield. And soon, the same hands that had been forced to serve would deliver not nourishment but reckoning. Violet's vengeance was taking shape, and once it began, there would be no turning back. The night of Violet's vengeance came not with thunder or flame, but with the quiet clatter of silver spoons and porcelain plates. Her masters dined as they always did, laughter mixing with the hum of cicadas outside, the scent of roasted meats and spiced stews filling the air. To them, this was another evening of indulgence. To Violet, it was the culmination of years of silent suffering. The meal looked no different from any other. The stew was thick and rich, the bread soft and steaming, the wine poured generously. But hidden within the food was her rebellion. A powder so fine it dissolved without trace, a bitterness masked by spices. As her masters ate, Violet watched with the calm detachment of someone who had rehearsed this moment countless times. First, there was no sign, but soon, the laughter turned to coughing, the faces flushed with feverish red, and the joyous conversation fell into chaos. Pain seized their bodies, their hands clutching their stomachs, their voices crying out in panic. Servants rushed about, but Violet remained still, her eyes steady, her heart resolute. For the first time, the power in that house shifted. The masters who once commanded her with whips and words now writhed helplessly, undone by the very food they demanded from her hands. The household erupted into confusion. Some servants fled in terror, others rushed to fetch doctors, but the poison had already begun its work. Physicians were summoned, their leeches and tonics useless against the invisible weapon Violet had chosen. As the night stretched on, some fell silent, their bodies succumbing, while others lingered in agony, praying for relief that never came. For Violet, this was no spectacle of cruelty. It was justice. Each cry of pain was an echo of the years she had endured humiliation, each collapse a reminder that even the most powerful were mortal. Yet she also understood the risk. Rumors spread quickly in New Orleans, and tales of poisoned masters often led to brutal retribution. Slaveholders lived in constant fear of betrayal, and when poison struck, suspicion always fell on the cook. Violet knew the cost of her act. Whether she escaped or was caught, her vengeance was already complete. The kitchen that had once enslaved her had become the very site of rebellion. And in that house, where masters had long believed themselves untouchable, their final lesson was being taught, that even the weakest, even the most silenced, could rise in unexpected ways. What happened to Violet after her act of vengeance is shrouded in fragments of rumor and silence. Some say she was caught and executed, her body made into a public warning for others who might dare to follow. Others whisper that she fled into the swamps, joining maroon communities of escaped slaves who lived beyond the grasp of the city's authorities. Still others believe her name became legend, retold in hushed tones by enslaved families who saw in her rebellion a spark of hope. What is certain is this: the city never forgot the poisonings. White households grew even more suspicious of their kitchens, their paranoia deepening. Masters watched their cooks with fearful eyes, tasting their meals with hesitation, haunted by the thought that each bite could be their last. Violet's vengeance, whether ending with her capture or her escape, had rippled far beyond her household. It was not merely about one family's downfall. It was about the fear she planted in the hearts of all who relied on enslaved labor. She had revealed the truth that every master tried to ignore, that their comfort was fragile, their control an illusion, and their trust a dangerous gamble. Violet's story survives not through court records or official documents, but through whispers, folklore, and the unspoken history of the enslaved. In a society that erased the names of cooks, seamstresses, and field hands, her act of rebellion gave her a place in memory. She stands as a haunting figure, not a leader of armies, not a public revolutionary, but a kitchen slave who turned food into a weapon. Her vengeance forces us to reconsider how rebellion could take many forms. While others sought freedom by running away or revolting with fire and blade, Violet chose patience and subtlety, striking at the very core of her oppressor's existence. The poison she served was not just physical. It was symbolic, a reminder that no amount of wealth or power could shield masters from the humanity of those they enslaved. In the story of New Orleans, where music, food, and culture continue to thrive, Violet's name lingers like an aftertaste, bitter but unforgettable. She reminds us that even silence can be powerful, and that sometimes the quietest rebellions are the deadliest of all. History often records the deeds of generals, politicians, and rulers, but the story of Violet reminds us that rebellion is not always written with armies or banners. Sometimes, it is written with the quiet stirring of a pot, the unseen sprinkle of powder, the patient hand of someone who has endured too much for too long. In the grand narrative of American slavery, Violet's name flickers like a candle in the dark, fragile, almost extinguished, yet powerful enough to illuminate the hidden fears of an entire society. Her act was both crime and protest, both murder and resistance. To her masters, she was a criminal who dared to defy the natural order they believed eternal. To those who lived in bondage, she was something else, a symbol of possibility, proof that even in the suffocating silence of slavery, there were ways to fight back. Whether she met her end at the hands of executioners or vanished into the swamps to live as a fugitive, Violet's vengeance endured in memory. New Orleans would go on to be celebrated for its cuisine, its music, its rich blend of cultures. Yet hidden beneath that heritage lies the truth that its kitchens once carried more than flavor. They carried the power of life and death. Violet's story forces us to confront this shadow, that behind the beauty of Creole households stood the suffering of enslaved women like her, women who bore scars invisible to history books but indelible in the human soul. Violet did not topple an empire, nor did she free her people. But in her act of rebellion, she revealed a truth that slavery tried to bury, that even the most silenced voice can speak through action, that even the most powerless hand can deliver judgment. Her vengeance was not just against those who owned her body, but against a system that denied her humanity. And in that defiance, Violet's name lives on, not as a servant, but as a shadow of resistance, a reminder that oppression always carries within it the seeds of its own undoing.